Nehemiah 6, we'll just start off by looking at Psalm 27, verses 1 to 3, because the whole of the chapter, as I'm sure you're familiar with, you had 2 weeks to prepare now. It resides on the edge of fear, whether or not you're going to get nudged and fall over to the fear of man or the fear of the things of this world, or if you can stay in that tension and reside in the fear of God, which is challenging. So Psalm 27, 1 to 3, I just want to frame it with this. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. Or do you think Nehemiah had these things in mind? I think that's why he was as good as he was. He had truth in mind. He was operating off of it. And it's a good thing to remind ourselves of. So Nehemiah 6. We see here that it's why strength at the leadership level is imperative. And I've tried to be careful to not make Nehemiah into like a glorified project manager and look at the examples we can get from Nehemiah. But there are examples, and I don't want to diminish that, but we need to recognize that this chapter in particular demonstrates how imperative leadership is, and quality and godly leadership. And here we see the enemies making a last-ditch effort to stop the work, and they sharpen their focus on Nehemiah. So their last chance, it's going to be rather telling. What we have to make the strategic attack, as it were. We're going right after Nehemiah. 1 attack, 2 attack, 3 attack, and then within those there's bundles of others that are inferred. So again, I tried to be careful, but we also have to balance it out. There is something to be said about leadership. It's important to appreciate those elements as they come up. And so we see plainly here that if you take out Nehemiah, then you've stopped the work. So with this in view, we see the enemy's aim was to stop the work. Here their tool of choice was manipulation through fear of man. Manipulation through fear of man. And the bulwark that sustained Nehemiah through multiple personal attacks was a proper fear of God. I hope you're seeing that. And boy, if you spent time in chapter 6, that was there quite plainly. Manipulation through fear of man. What preserves them the fear of God. It came up over and over again. I hope we'll draw it out well. And I hope and I pray, and I do genuinely pray that we'll grasp that we might genuinely believe that. I know sometimes I sound redundant. I think there's biblical precedent for that, to be redundant, to stir you up by way of reminder, to make points of emphasis. But I want you to appreciate and have a proper fear of God, and let that bring into submission any fear of man that might attempt to well up. So if we do walk in the fear of God, then we walk with a peculiar boldness through this life. It's grounded in confidence in God. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, this is not an absolute application, but I do think it's proper and applicable, and I'm going to come back to it later. It's what I'm proud of, and I think we can all get our hands around by way of application. This is the Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is the primary part. There's other parts to it. But I love what they did under the center of the fixture. They quote Proverbs 28:1, the first half of it. The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are as bold as bold as a lion. And that's exactly where Nehemiah was. And it's fascinating because I've seen that time and time again. There's no reason to run. There's no reason to fear. You can have confidence in God. That's a righteous disposition. So again, I pray and I hope that we'll grasp that. We might genuinely believe and walk with a peculiar boldness through this world while we're grounded in our confidence in God. So Nehemiah 6, 1 to 9. This will be the first section and maybe the only section today. But we'll do what we can do, and then what happens is we'll figure it out from there. I will catch up soon. But that being said, Nehemiah 6, 1 to 9. Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I built the wall, and there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem said to me, saying, are sent to me, saying, "Come and let us meet together at..." Oh, thank you. In the plain of Ona. But they intended to do me harm, and I sent messengers to them, saying, "I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. In the same way, Sanballat for the 5th time sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. And it was written, "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, 'There is a king in Judah.' And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together." Then I sent to him, saying, "No such thing as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind. For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands." So we see correspondence, slander from without, 6:1-9. So while there was extraordinary progress on the walls and the restoration of the city, there was also continued opposition. It's continuing through here. We're familiar with these characters, aren't we? Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. Geshem only has appeared one time before this, but when he did, he sure was ugly. Slandering the Jewish people, making very similar accusations as are made here. And now Nehemiah begins the chapter identifying 3 of these well-known enemies. He has others. He referenced them in a general capacity, but these continue to lead the charge, as it were. And Sanballat appears to be the point man. I unpacked this a little bit in the study guide in view of his placement, the redundancy, the role he takes on. But it appears he's the point man. And then we're going to see a really interesting shift in the chapter that Tobiah becomes kind of the primary guy. And it gets you to the point where you're at the end of the book and you're like, oh, that's why he's so upset. And that's why Ezra had so many problems with the intermarriage of the nations, because when you marry into families, and in this particular Old Testament Mosaic law context that had restrictions for good reasons, in that context, I'm not cross-paralleling. We're not Israel. We're not under the Mosaic law. We're not under their marriage restrictions in that regard. But there's something to be said to be careful about that. And obviously, we could make an easy New Testament parallel with not marrying outside of the faith, because I can tell you the heartache is pronounced, as I know many of us know. But there's a notable chef that Tobiah will take that role, but for now, it's Sanballat. And each of the 3 names participated in an overt assault on Nehemiah. It's not, we got to stop this work. It's, we're going after Nehemiah. And it is genuinely personal. Personally throughout the chapter, primarily through strategic plans and efforts at manipulating through fear. And that's what they do over and over again. Their battle tools now are words. And can our words craft fear? Can our words provoke action that would be detrimental or damaging? Because they want to discredit his leadership. And that goes back to what I was inferring at the very beginning, that if leadership doesn't matter, if it's just, well, we lop that one off, somebody else will pick up the mantle, well, then discrediting the guy at the top wouldn't be all that consequential. But there is something to be said for the integrity of leadership, and that's exactly why they're going after him. Now, I want you again to focus on, see these strategies. I don't want to diminish Nehemiah's context or overly esteem our own in some ways, but we have a well-seasoned enemy, and he seems to doesn't seem to diversify tactics so much as refine them. So we see manipulation through fear and discrediting. That's exactly what we see today. I mean, Peter tells us our enemy is a roaring lion seeking to consume and to destroy. You don't think manipulation through fear and discrediting are prominent tools? And if they're there, then what do? You watch your heart. You don't succumb to manipulation through fear. You guard from discrediting. So just be mindful of that. I know it's a little bit of a side issue, but it's certainly what was experiencing through Nehemiah. But again, it's a reality for us as well. So manipulating through fear, discrediting. Have to be proactively defensive against these fiery darts, as it were. So now there were other enemies as well, the rest of our enemies, as he references, but these men obviously distinguished themselves, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, in their opposition to Nehemiah. Now, regarding Nehemiah's leadership and why he was such a high-value target, as it were, look at the enemy's perspective. Obviously, Nehemiah is providing the account, but he's, I think, to some extent giving their perspective. This was Nehemiah's wall. Well, did Nehemiah? We read chapter 3. Everybody's building this thing, right? But it's Nehemiah's wall. Why is that? Because he's identified with that work in such an intimate and absolute capacity. His leadership marked the wall, and therefore the last focus effort was on taking him down. Because again, leadership was consequential. The Jewish people were like, wait a second. We have a list of names. We know who worked on the wall. Yes. But it was identified with Nehemiah in a very personal way. And now they direct their attention away from their larger military tactics. So as we were joking, swords and cakes, right? Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So we've gotten past that now. There is certainly the threat of military assault still, but and as we'll see later in the chapter, well, by some means we'll see this later in the chapter, with some decisions that are made in terms of guards and the opening of the gates and whatnot. But as a whole, they're focused more precisely on either potentially killing or at the least discrediting the leadership. But what's left to be done? Nehemiah qualifies. He says that they said I've finished the wall, and then he has a little parenthetical statement here, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates. Well, that matters. And this is a little 2-for-1 bonus, even though we're short on time, because no wall was completed until the gates and the doors were hung and secured. Because what happens if you go to the eastern gate area of Jerusalem and there are no, if it's not even blocked up, but if there's no gates or ways of securing it, it's just a hole, right? It's a vulnerable city still. So it's still on the precipice of, can they pull this off? Can they make it secure? Now here's your bonus. Well, first I'll get to this. The information was well known among the surrounding enemies and peoples, and if there's any chance of disrupting, now's your chance. This is your last window of opportunity. So again, the walls were basically mostly inconsequential, not completely, but mostly inconsequential till you finish that last part. And again, you can see and appreciate that by looking at, this is the old city wall of Jerusalem, and by old city wall, I do not mean Nehemiah's walls. I don't mean Hezekiah's walls, well, that'd be even older. Even walls that we would have seen in first century necessarily. This is, I think, about 500 or so is approximate time frame of these old city walls. But again, you can appreciate there's no if the walls are completed, the gates are completed, you have a secure city. Now, what is this gate? Anybody know? It has 2 primary names. The Eastern Gate, and also called the, come on, San Francisco tried to steal this, the Golden Gate. There you go. Now, anybody know why it's boarded up, as it were, or actually cemented and closed and whatnot?
Because nobody is supposed to go through that until the Messiah?
Yes, this is, so knowing your prophecy, Messiah enters through the Eastern Gate. Okay, that's great. Now, what's all this down here? Anybody? Yeah, okay. So, John the Baptist, or well, actually, somebody precedes the Christ. We understand that to be John the Baptist. The Muslims, from what I understand, they concluded that John the Baptist and at least Messiah wouldn't go through a graveyard. So they put a graveyard in front of the Eastern Gate. And just to be safe, they sealed it off. And so when you're on the Mount of Olives and you're looking across the Kidron Valley, you can chuckle and be like, it's too late. It's too late. He's already gone through. But we'll do that later on our class field trip one day.
Yes.
Next week.
But I do want you to see and appreciate those little details and be grateful that our Lord's already. You know what? He obviously can get past cemeteries and sealed gates as well. But just a little bonus there. You're not getting that over there, so stay in here. Now, the first overt assault comes through the pairing of Sanballat and Geshem. So Tobiah, as I said, he's going to become a more prominent figure toward the end of the chapter. He's kind of Sanballat's little companion frequently, but right now it's Sanballat and Geshem, and it's through diplomacy, by letters being exchanged. with a request for a meeting to resolve an accusation of offense. So Nehemiah, there are rumors about you. You need to come talk to us. Sounds reasonable enough, right? That's on face value. Okay, that's what diplomacy does. You have cordial conversation, maybe heated conversation, but you seek to resolve something in a peaceful way. And the request was for these two men, or from these two men, was for Nehemiah to meet with them in the plain of Ono up here. And it was basically regarded as kind of probably neutral territory, which again, this is very diplomatic. Not in Judea, right outside Samaria. Given it's not necessarily completely friendly territory, but it is more neutral. But what it does is it takes Nehemiah almost 25 miles out of the city. And what do you do when you take the leadership away from the work? Is you've made that work more vulnerable. And so Nehemiah sees through it. So this would make the location, again, reasonable for diplomacy, but it'd take a couple of days for travel and the accommodations and whatnot. So while it appears benign, there's something else going on. And what does he say, or what does the request say? Come and let us meet together in the plain of Ono. The request alone, again, seems reasonable until it's critically examined. And Nehemiah's own recounting of it affirms a neutral face value, but then provides a contrasting conjunction. Okay, looks simple enough, but they intended to do me harm. He knows the malice nature of the intent. Intent is always hard to discern. We have to be so careful imputing intent on other people. I know why they're doing that. You know what? You might not. And you get embarrassed enough times, hopefully you'll straighten up and stop doing that to people. But he knows the intent, and we're going to watch that intent unfold. And he recognizes the intent was malicious. And such is the nature of deception, the responsibility to be shrewd, and that's part of his leadership, is at face value, reasonable request. Good leadership. He's seeing through it. He's shrewdly exercising some discernment, and he recognizes that he has a responsibility to address it in kind. So Nehemiah shrewdly refuses the request as he knew their motive was to do him harm. What the harm might have been, we don't know. It may have been to just get him away from the city. It may have been to kidnap him. It may have very well been to murder him, because we've already seen they're prepared to kill him. They've already overtly made plans to just kill whoever to stop the wall work, so don't think they wouldn't kill him. So we don't know, and it could have been just to destroy his credibility, because where we won't get today is the next section where that's exactly what they do. They're going after his character and credibility as a leader. And as if you can do something as simple as that, it was as effective as knocking him off in some other regard. So there are various elements to the letter that are addressed in the study guide, but the sum conclusion was this. Nehemiah seemed to make it clear that the decision to not go superseded his own opinion of the matter. It was a matter of him fulfilling his responsibilities. I'm not going. I have a greater work to do. And so he's diplomatically and shrewdly answering them. That should have been enough for them to be like, okay, let's meet in Jerusalem, or maybe respond in another helpful way. But that wasn't going to happen. And Gene Getz provided some helpful commentary here. He concludes that Nehemiah's question was an opportunity to neutralize the request with outright accusing his enemies and affording them an opportunity to demonstrate their sincerity in the matter. And that's where shrewdness comes in. He didn't say, "Oh, I know you guys. I've read chapters 1 through 5. You're up to no good. That's what you're up to." It was tactful, and there's a skill and a grace with being tactful and accompanying shrewdness with tact. But their persistence is not accommodating Nehemiah, and then ultimately their slander betrayed their motives plainly. Because you get to letter number 5, and it's not, "Nehemiah, I'm very worried about you." It's, "I'm going to broadcast my slanderous accusations to the world, and let the chips fall where they may, and you're going to come." So Nehemiah's response was in some ways a litmus test. It made plain the motives of the other party, most plainly seen in their irrational compulsion to have Nehemiah travel to meet them. There are 4 like exchanges. "Nehemiah, let's come meet. Come meet at." And he says, "No, guys, I'm busy. I have a great work to do." "Nehemiah, come let's meet at." "No, I'm busy." This happens 4 times. So following the 4 tense, the true malice intent it surfaces. It didn't take much, but it finally surfaces. And we see the overt attempt at manipulation that saturates the fifth letter from Sanballat, who appears to be the primary aggressor, as we talked about, and the more tenacious of the company to harm Nehemiah in this particular instant. Now, the fifth letter, and we'll finish with the fifth letter, was overtly hostile. It included slanderous accusations that had been completely made up. Nehemiah says as much. You want to know where this came from? It came out of your imagination. That's what it came out of. But why is he doing that? He's attempting to provoke him to, fear. Fear. He wants to scare Nehemiah into certain conduct. This last letter was also different in that it was an open letter, hadn't been sealed, which was on some levels potentially a sign of disrespect. And it was also basically a letter to the editor. Whoever sees this, sees it. It could be freely read by anyone, making it potentially as a matter of public discourse. And it's not just Nehemiah, we need to talk. There's some, and I know, we gotta sort this out. It was, so they're saying this about you. And you're doing these things. And these are the very things that last time somebody else made this up, it got the wall stopped. And Ezra wasn't too happy about it. And it could get you in trouble with the king in other ways. The cupbearer, close to the king, an advisor, double-crossing him. Sounds like a bad spot to be in. Why don't you come talk? Extremely manipulative and driving him to fear. And it was a strategic move by Sanballat, making public correspondence so as to provoke Nehemiah to act out of fear. And because the letter's contents, could he just ignore them? Once that's public discourse, it's done. You have to address it. So Nehemiah responds very differently this fifth time. He was at this time responding to an accusation and not just a request. Sanballat was stating that Nehemiah's allegedly rebellious conduct was known and discussed among the surrounding nations and peoples. This letter was framed as an accusation that was supposedly self-supporting through the allegation that it was substantiated by the breadth of persons who spoke it. Everybody's talking about this, Nehemiah. Even some of the other leaders and governors, they're affirming that this is happening. And it's interesting because this was an accusation that found its support in alleged volume of accusers over actual substantive evidence. And that's frightening. That can provoke you into substantial fear. At that point in time, I don't have a lawyer and retainer, but I'm going to find one. It's frightening, isn't it? And if we're looking at the preponderance of evidence, it's not looking good. So you can appreciate why it could have provoked fear in Nehemiah. We all can get that, right? We might not be Old Testament governors of Judah returning under these conditions, heartbroken over the city, watching it get restored, but we can get our hands around genuinely being provoked to fear in a like context. The accusation was that Nehemiah and the Jews intended to rebel against King Artaxerxes, and that's no small matter. I mean, we understand there's certain things you can't say and joke about the president. You may want to, you may think it's funny, but it'll get you in some trouble. Well, we can't even begin to imagine the context of the accusation here. And it's again effectively the same one that the same king, King Artaxerxes, stopped the work under Ezra. And this accusation was aiming at the very motivation for the building of the wall by Nehemiah and the people. So how insulting. How did this all start? Nehemiah heard about the city. He heard about his people. And how did he respond? Sweet. Sounds like I'm going from cupbearer to governor. Is that what it was? How did he respond? Now, he was broken, right? He's praying and fasting for an extended period of time. And now to say this was your motivation. It was all about something else. How, again, fear, yes, and anger and fear kind of making nice little bedfellows here because how dare him? How dare him? How insulting. It'd be like you run and snatch a child out from the road. Well, they're about to get hit by a truck or something. Oh, well, you did that because you got a hero complex. Really? I just don't like seeing kids get hit by cars. So how very, very crass and rude these accusations were. Further, it was accused that in addition to leading a rebellion, Nehemiah allegedly intended to become the king of Judah and was allegedly securing prophets to declare him as king. Again, severe accusation in the context of the Persian Empire, but also how incredibly insulting that they're accusing him of using religious deception to achieve his means. Are you going to rise up? You have prophets that are going to substantiate this. They're going to authenticate it. Imagine that rumor catching fire in Jerusalem, where they're already tired. We saw in chapter 4 or chapter 5, I think 4, that song, that poem-like song, that the laborers are tired. They're tired. They're wore out. Now they're finishing, but boy, that could have been a domino if that caught fire. Sanballat was plainly attempting to frame his desired meeting with Nehemiah under the weight of these severe accusations. So we see overt coercion, using slanderous accusation, a tool of manipulation and fear. Boy, that's a really hard spot to be in. It's a really hard spot. And you could see somebody easily capitulating to just fear of man and be like, in the bigger picture, I need to make this go away. I know it's not whatever. It's basically he's being pressed to give in or even settle, as it were. But you see how much duress a letter writing campaign has turned here as well. No swords this time. No, I'm going to beat your face in, Nehemiah. Pen and parchment, I guess, of some sort. This is a letter writing campaign. We see how incredibly dangerous it became. Possibly as intimidating, as destructive as a military campaign. This I would imagine would be as frightening as hearing they're coming by night to kill everybody. Because what do you do there? Well, you set up a guard at night. We can get our hands around that. And that's not fear of man, that's being tactically sound. But what do you do with this? Well, you fear God. You put confident trust in God, and you don't capitulate to the fear of man. And that's tough. And I hope you're hearing, I'm saying that's tough, because I'm vulnerable to this, and I know Marcellus, probably Drew, we're all vulnerable to this, right? And we need to be mindful. We need to care for one another, pray for one another, watch out for one another. Sanballat uses 3 manipulative, slanderous rumors as a ruse to meet, as though he were hoping to set Nehemiah straight or resolve these rumors, as it were. But as I discussed in the study guide, his tactics and his argument, they just don't hold up to scrutiny. If you look at it and be like, wait a second, let's weigh out. So you think this governor's conspiring to overthrow the king, and you're a regional governor with him, and then you want to secretly meet with him to sort this all out. That doesn't make sense. Just let the chips fall where you hate the guy. Let it happen. So it's interesting because that's the nature of malicious intent and manipulation and lies. They don't bear up under the scrutiny that truth can. Truth, when challenged, will stay buoyant. It might take some cheap shots, but it will stay buoyant. The manipulation, it doesn't hold up. The slander doesn't hold up. Nehemiah does not capitulate in fear, but rebukes the lies. That's a courageous man. I mean, that's really, to me, he's not like, oh, I don't know what to do, or not silent. He rebukes them. He rebukes them for what they were, products of Sanballat's corrupt imagination. And again, to me, that was extraordinarily courageous, holding his ground, demonstrating that he was not governed by the fear of men, but by the fear of God. You see the difference? And he wasn't just, oh, I'm going to trust God, but even boldly so. And so you remember my old friend here. Maybe a little bit more clearly now we can see the reference on the memorial to Psalm 20 or Proverbs 28:1, because it's a beautiful confidence and advantage when you rest in the fear of God and not in the fear of man. It's the righteous that are as bold as a lion. It's the wicked that are fleeing. No man's even pursuing. But such is the nature of those who succumb to the fear of man and who have such an insatiable appetite for their sin that they're frightened that it might actually catch up with them. So Nehemiah saw the offense for what it was, and we'll wrap up with this, an effort to manipulate through fear. The enemies knew that if they could persuade the Jews to be governed by a fear of man and the powers of men, rather than a controlling and worshipful fear of God, then they would forfeit the work's completion. So depending on the strength of men and conducting oneself in submission to others would prove to rob them of necessary perseverance and drive to a final success. So how does Nehemiah respond? What's he do? Yeah. They're saying, this is going to be effective. I'm going to be manipulated and succumb to the fear of man, and the work won't be done. But now, oh God, strengthen my hands. That's confidence before His Lord and confidence in His Lord. Before the Lord and in the Lord. So I hope, boy, not everything in Nehemiah pushes the day-to-day life application button. Sometimes it's large principles, sometimes it's truths, sometimes it's historical things that we just need to root ourselves in because they're glorious and they're part of the Scriptures. But that's something you can get your hands around right there. I can capitulate, or I can be confident in God. So I hope, Lord, give us the grace to be confident in a fear of God. And sometimes that is frightening, but the Lord's sufficient. And if we're going to say He is, then we best act like He is. And in a like way, one of my pastor friends, former professors, he was talking about if you're going to pray, and I may have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but he said if you're going to pray at the table and give thanks to God for your food and whatnot, then don't treat it like you actually earned it and did it yourself. You pray with the gratitude that you know that was from the hand of God. And the same way with having confidence in God. If we're going to say yes, if we're going to sing worshipful songs and declare the excellencies of God in Christ, then you best act like it. And that means fearing God over fearing man. And that's hard. We'll need each other's help, by the way. Well, the Lord's grace is sufficient, but it's also sufficient through one another. So, all right, let's pray. Lord, that we would find comfort and delight and peaceful satisfaction in resting in You. And not only resting in You, but being confident, even bold. We really can't appreciate how severe of a situation Nehemiah was under. The pressure, the vulnerability to just fear for any number of reasons. And yet we find, put him in a corner, and what does he do? He demonstrates tenacious confidence in God. And what does that look like? It doesn't look like him trying to bully somebody else with theology. It's standing firm, speaking truth, and crying out to God, and knowing that You will strengthen his hands. So Lord, I beg that You would teach us and help us and work in our hearts and help us to help one another. Because this is a very challenging work in our hearts, and we're in progress and will be until we behold You face to face. And so until such day comes, Lord, give us the grace to have confidence in our great God, to fear You and not to fear man. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.